All right, guys, so this is the last video for the immunity chapter. And so all we have left to do is go through the steps of both the humoral and the cellular response. And so they're very similar, the steps, until you get towards the end. And then I have like a diagram kind of putting it all together, the innate and adaptive immunity, along with the cellular and the humoral. So we can kind of see how the immune system as a whole works together. All right, so with the humoral response, the first step is that an antigen presenting cell, as we saw before, is going to ingest a microbe, right? And it's going to break that microbe down, whether it's bacteria or a virus, and it's going to present an antigen from it on its MHC2 protein. Okay, and so then it's going to take that MHC2 to a T helper cell in the lymph nodes. All right, it's going to show that T helper cell the MHC2, and then that T helper cell will become activated. All right, so when it's activated, it goes through a process called clonal expansion. All right, that just means, kind of as the word clone indicates, right, it's going to replicate itself. And so it's going to replicate itself, and it's going to make two different types of replicated cells. It's going to make effector T cells, which are the activated T cells that are going to go do the function. And it's going to make memory T helper cells, right? So we talked about that with our primary and our secondary response. Okay, so now those effector T helper cells are going to go and release, now that they're activated, cytokines. Okay, and so cytokines are going to be chemicals that are going to function to enhance the immune response. They're going to activate other immune cells, right? They're going to be important for that chemotaxis that's going to draw other cells to the site of an infection. Okay, so it's going to release cytokines. Those cytokines are going to activate B cells, and those B cells are going to undergo clonal expansion. They're going to start dividing, and we're going to end up with memory B cells, and we're going to end up with plasma cells. All right, so plasma cells are just, are just kind of the activated form of a B cell. B cells will grow much, much bigger, and they develop a lot of rough ER, right? So that's what this squiggle in here is. That's going to be rough ER because they make a bunch of antibodies. All right, so this is rough ER. They make antibodies, and remember, antibodies are made of proteins, okay? And so they're full of rough ER. They're cranking out those antibodies, right, to go and fight the pathogens. And so that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to agglutinate them, they're going to neutralize them, all of that good stuff. All right, so now let's talk through the cellular response. Very similar until we get down to the end. So with the cellular response, remember, its function is to destroy all abnormal cells. So the cells involved here are going to be, again, our antigen presenting cell and our T helper cell, but then we're going to have our T cytotoxic cell instead of a B cell. Okay, so the first steps are the same. Our antigen is going to encounter, in this case we'll talk about a virus, because those will infect body cells. All right, so the antigen presenting cell will encounter a virus. It'll ingest it, and it'll present an antigen from it on its MHC2. It'll take that antigen to a T helper cell, which will recognize that antigen, become activated, and go through clonal expansion. Okay, and so with this clonal expansion, we're going to produce, just like before, our effector T helper cells and our memory T helper cells. The effector T helper cells are going to release cytokines, just like they did with the humoral response. Those cytokines, in this case, are going to activate T cytotoxic cells. All right, those T cytotoxic cells are going to undergo clonal expansion, and they are going to form, memory T cytotoxic cells. There we go. And effector T cytotoxic cells. Those effector T cytotoxic cells are going to go and search the body cells for MHC1s that say that they're infected with the same antigen that was presented by this MHC2, right? So they're going to try to match that wanted poster on the MHC2 to an infected cell's MHC1. Okay, and so if they find a cell with that matching wanted poster, they're going to release perforins, right? Just like our NK cells do, and those perforins are going to poke little holes in the infected cell and kill it. Okay, so now let's look at this kind of as a picture and as a process. All right, so the first part of this picture, this is all going to be the innate immune system. All right, so this is innate immunity. Okay, and so we can start here with our body cells, okay? And so with the body cells, one, remember they have, if these are kind of columnar cells, let's say maybe in like the respiratory tract, right? They're gonna have goblet cells. They're gonna produce a lot of mucus. Remember, mucus was one of the aspects, one of the things used by the innate immune system. So we're gonna have mucus. That mucus can trap little viruses, all right? So these are viruses. So it can trap it, and then that can be gotten rid of. However, if a virus does make it into one of these cells, what happens is we start down here, right? So let's say a virus wants to infect a cell. Since we haven't talked about viruses really, what the virus is going to do is it is going to kind of like land on the cell with these little legs. All right, so it'll come to a cell, it'll land on it, right, and it'll have that little head, and inside of the little head of the virus is DNA. Okay, so it's going to inject its DNA into the cell and essentially force the cell to make more viruses. And so these cells start to make all the little parts that make up the virus. Eventually they're going to assemble together to form a virus, and when it does, that cell is going to pop and release all those viruses out, right? So viruses essentially turn your body cells into virus factories, right? And then kill them in a manner to release the virus. Okay? All right, so we have on our cells, so a couple things to point out here. One, we have these membrane proteins. So this would be the MHC1. Okay? And so because this particular cell here is not infected, it's nice and healthy, that MHC1 is blue, right? Nice, healthy, self-marking MHC1. Okay? However, if we look at these cells here that are full of virus, that MHC1 would present a little bit of that virus saying, I'm infected. All right, so this would be an MHC1 for the infected cell. Okay, and then another part of the innate immune system that we'd mentioned is that these cells, when they're infected with a virus, kind of as like their last, ditch effort, they'll release these chemicals called interferons. All right, that interferon is going to go and bind to neighboring cells that have not been infected and help to protect them so that they don't become infected. Okay. And so then the next step, right, is going to be our antigen presenting cell, our macrophage. And remember, macrophages are part of the adaptive, I have these backwards, don't I? Yeah, sorry. So this is innate, I even said innate, right? This is the adaptive, right? Non-specific is what we mean. Non-specific adaptive immunity, sorry. Y'all are probably confused by that and we're like staring at it. All right, because remember, mucus, interferons, right? Our macrophages are all part of that adaptive immunity. All right, so the next step in our innate immune response, remember macrophages are part of the innate immune system, okay? And so if they encounter one of these viruses, right, that virus, it's gonna engulf it, it's gonna phagocytize it, just like we talked about before with our, this is a macrophage, and it's gonna be acting as an antigen presenting cell. Okay, and so it's going to phagocytize that virus, all right, bring it into a little vesicle, and it's going to merge that vesicle with a lysosome, all right. That digestive enzymes in that lysosome are going to break down that virus into little bits, and then the little piece of the virus can be attached to an MHC2 protein as the antigen, okay? And then that MHC2 protein can be added to the surface of that antigen presenting cell, all right? And so now this is where the innate immune system is going to reach out and start talking to the adaptive immune system, okay? So over here we kind of start with the adaptive immunity. Okay. So remember that antigen presenting cell is going to travel through lymph vessels to find a lymph node, and in that lymph node we are going to have our T helper cells. So this would be a T helper cell. Okay, and remember those sorry, my voice is going out. Those T helper cells have CD4 proteins, right? They're also called CD4 cells that help them dock onto that MHC2. And then they also have the T cell receptor that actually does the interacting with that antigen on that MHC2. Okay. So then from there, this cell is going to become activated, right? So when it interacts with that MHC2, it becomes activated, all right? And it can become activated into these two types of cells. So remember, that's called clonal expansion, okay? And so then these are going to be the memory T helper cells, right? They're just going to hang out in case you encounter this pathogen again. And then we have our, over here, effector T helper cells. Okay. All right, so we have both of those. Okay, so now we've activated the first step in our adaptive immune response. The antigen presenting cell has presented an antigen to a T helper cell. That T helper cell is activated through clonal expansion to make memory cells and effector T helper cells. Okay, so let's do the humoral response first. All right, so we'll add that here. So this is the humoral response. Okay, so for this humoral response, our activated T helper cell will go and it will release cytokines. Okay, so that's these little red guys. So they're going to be released by this T helper cell, and then they're going to act on this kind of green cell here. All right, so this would be our B cell. Actually, let's write this over here so we'll have more space. Okay, so this would be our B cell. That B cell is going to become activated. Okay, remember it's going to go through clonal expansion, and it will develop either memory B cells, right, which would be these guys. So these are our memory B cells, or they will become our plasma cells, which remember are these big guys with those big chunks of rough ER. All right, so this is a plasma cell. And then those plasma cells are going to crank out and make antibodies, right? They're antibody factories. Okay, and then those antibodies are going to do their job. They're going to agglutinate that virus. They're going to find it, neutralize it, agglutinate it, opsonize it, all those things, right? Make it easy for those to be phagocytized and removed. Okay? All right, and so we are going to take a second now, right, and just talk about this little box, because B cells, if you remember, right, we included B cells in our list of what can be an antigen presenting cell. And so in this little panel, we're just showing a B cell, an example of a B cell acting as an antigen presenting cell. Okay, so remember, B cells have those B cell receptors, which are just going to be antibodies on the surface of the B cell. So that B cell receptor can find and bind to, right, that virus. And so when it does, it's going to take that virus and it's going to engulf it, right? It's going to phagocytize it and process it just like our other antigen presenting cell we talked about, and then add it to an MHC2. Okay, and so that's our MHC2 with our little antigen from that virus that the B cell just digested, and it's going to take that MHC2 and it's going to present it to a T helper cell. All right, so that would be the T helper cell with its CD4 protein and its T cell receptor. Okay, so it would do the same process just like our macrophage that we just looked at, all right, except this is a B cell, and it's going to find that virus, right, because that antibody on its surface is going to be specific for that virus. Okay. All right, so that's our humoral response. So now let's talk about our cellular response. Okay, so the cellular response. So with this cellular response, let's pull this down a little. There we go. All right, we're going to have our activated T helper cell again is going to release those cytokines. Okay, and then those cytokines are going to act on our T cytotoxic cells. That's what these guys are. Those T cytotoxic cells are then going to become activated. All right, they will either be memory T cytotoxic cells, or they will be effector T cytotoxic cells. Okay, and so that process again is called clonal expansion. And so then the memory T cells are going to hang out in your system until you encounter that pathogen again. All right, so now it's these activated T cytotoxic cells that are going to go and fight that infection. So we have our CD8 protein here, right, because these are T cytotoxic cells. And then they're also going to have that T cell receptor here that's going to be able to find that antigen and bind to it. All right, so now that these cells are activated, our effector T cytotoxic cell is going to go prowl around looking for cells that are infected with this virus that it's been alerted to. All right, so it's been alerted by that T helper cell that there's a virus in the area, so it's going to go and start looking for that virus. Okay, and so when it does find it, that T cell receptor is going to bind to the antigen, which is being presented, remember, on an MHC1 protein, because this is, remember we said here, right, this is that protein that normally says, I'm a normal self cell, but now because the cell's infected, it's saying, help me, I'm an infected cell. Okay, so that T cytotoxic cell will find that abnormal MHC1, and it will release, remember those perforins. Whoops, there we go. All right, so these are perforins. And then those perforins are going to go and they're going to poke a bunch of little holes into the cell, and those holes are going to allow water to enter the cell, and eventually that cell will burst and die. Okay? All right, so that's the whole system, all right? And as you can see, it all kind of works together. The innate and the adaptive immunity work together. The humoral response can also activate the cellular response because these guys can act as antigen-presenting cells. All right, so it's very complex, right? Even more complex than this demonstrates, but this is what I want you guys to know. And so I've taken this and I've made it into a practice worksheet for you guys. It's not graded, but it's up on iCollege in the section for this lecture. So you can just print it out and, you know, fill it in as practice for understanding the different parts of this system. Okay, and so that's it for this video, guys.